So in this video today, I'm just going to be going over how much it cost me to cycle all of Italy, every region. I cycled 6,400 kilometers over 128 days, and I had an extra 20 days, either side of that with family. So in total, I was out there for 148 days. And I'm going to be breaking down the spend into three categories here. So first of all, spend in Italy, which will cover food, drink, and accommodation. Second of all is like admin. So that was insurance. So travel, bike, drone insurance, and then also transport. So, planes to get there, ferries to get to the islands, trains to get home, everything like that. And then the final one is equipment costs. So if you don't already have the equipment, this is the kind of vague figure that, it will cost you to get a decent setup at least. And then also maintenance costs out on the road. So, I did have a few issues out there, which I'll get into later. And then I also bought some extra equipment, which I needed on the trip. Okay, so let's first go into spend it in Italy. So food and drink, jumping straight in there. Most expensive by far of all the expenses on this trip, £2,451 for the 128 days plus the 20 days. And that comes out to around £17 a day, which is pretty expensive. I did it quite comfortably in terms of the sense that I was unrestricted. Like if I wanted to eat at a restaurant, I'd eat there. I bought what I wanted in the supermarkets, and I kind of just ate what I, fancied at the time. It wasn't until the end when I was just like, oh, I have like this limited amount of savings left and I need to do Scotland as well. So I'm going to start eating a bit more at the supermarkets and less, at restaurants and things. But that was only within the last 2-3 weeks, because it was kind of nice to be unrestricted in my head. I didn't want to be thinking about money the entire time. Bear in mind that, I quit my job, I had no income whatsoever, and I was just living off the savings that I had from 6 years working in London. So many cappuccinos and pistachio croissants out there. It was, if you watch my daily upload videos on my shorts channels, you would definitely have seen that. So, biggest cost out there by far. And then the other side of the spend in Italy was accommodation. So I camped for 73 nights, and then I stayed with family and friends quite a few nights, but then I had to stay in accommodation, hotels and things like that, and that cost me £1,295 for 38 nights. So that averaged out to around £34 a night in the rooms. Some of these varied from, 20 euros to the most expensive being 90 euros. And the 91 was quite high versus the average, it was usually 20 to 50 and then sometimes up to 60. Accommodation in Europe isn't the cheapest, Italy, especially. If you're doing a bicycle trip in Southeast Asia, South America, places like that, you could really whittle that cost down. And those places, I think, especially the American side, a bit more kind of conducive for warm showers, hosts, all that kind of stuff. I didn't use anything like that in Italy whatsoever, and it probably is worth looking into. I did speak to a few people that did use it, but the problem I had with it was, from asking other people as well, they said they would usually get ghosted a lot by the hosts. So it will be the night that they need to go there and they haven't heard anything, for 4 days. And then sometimes just nothing. And, they'd have to find something else. But then I also didn't want to plan my route around these warm showers hosts when I didn't need to. If I had to, if the money was extremely tight and I had to do it within a very small budget, I would have definitely looked into this. But I wanted to just have that kind of freedom to decide on the day, every day, where I was going to stay. And I stayed in a tent, 73 nights for the entire trip, which is quite a lot. I do typically 3 to 4 days in the tent, and then the 4th or 5th night, in a hotel to shower, charge my gear. And it was a good way to kind of combat illness, especially in the colder months, when I did it in October, November. It's very easy to get ill on a trip like this when you're fully exerting yourself every day, then you have a bad night's sleep in the tent, you could be cold, you could be wet, and you do that continuously, very easy to get ill. So if you kind of break that up with a night in a hotel or a dry place every now and then, it's really going to help you out. So yeah, that's the final cost of everything for spend in Italy. So that's £3,746 for 128 days on the bike, plus the 20 days I spent with family, which was, there wasn't too much spend in there, to be honest. So if you have all the equipment and then, admin aside, transport, insurances, that's how much it cost me to kind of survive in Italy. And yeah, it can be done for a lot cheaper if you want to. So moving on to the admin, which was a breakdown of insurance and then transport costs. First off, we got insurance, which was £331. And these are 3 insurances here. So I got travel, which is kind of like your basic health insurance abroad, any accidents, stuff like that. So that cost me £224 for the full 148 days. And I went with Admiral insurance for that. And I think that was their platinum cover, where I got gadget insurance as well. So for like my electronics, because I had the camera with me, my drone, my filming equipment. And it covers you for the planes as well. So that's why you should book it for kind of like the day you travel / the day before, you know, whatever means that's included. And, you know, if stuff goes wrong with your suitcase and you can prove that you had the stuff in there, you know, it's a good way to kind of claim stuff back on that, even though it could take months. So the next insurance was bike insurance. So that was excluded from the kind of travel insurance I had. So anything that went wrong with the bike in terms of if it got smashed to bits in a car accident, they wouldn't cover that. And this cost me £82 for the full trip. And that's kind of like an even out amount, because it cost around 200, but then I had £120 kind of claimed back in terms of an accident, and then also, well, 2 accidents. One of them, my derailleur hanger snapped when it hit a rock, and I got that replaced. It cost £90 or €90. And then I also had the tire bulged on me, so it went over something and it exploded and the tire popped out, and they gave me £25 for that, which, you know, it kind of worked out. And insurance is that thing where it looks like a waste of money if it doesn't, you know, fully even out to zero. But then I was covered in the sense of if my bike got hit with a car, or, you know, I crashed into a wall and the frame snapped, I would pretty much get cover back for the bike. Or if it got stolen, because I had a gold secure lock as well, and I could prove that it was, you know, kind of fixed to a very secure location. It's very difficult with insurance, you never know, but it's better to have it than not to have it. And £82 for the 4 months, you know, is pretty good. The final insurance was drone insurance. So drones can have their whole other video just dedicated to that. Just quickly, so you need to have an operator ID in one of the European Union countries. Mine was from Luxembourg. And then you also need to register with the aviation authority of that country. So in Italy, it's called D-Flight, and it lets you see the flight restriction zones. I think you had to pay €12 to register your account and then register your drone. It puts people off flying because, you know, all the major cities are basically red zones. You can't fly there. And so when some people do, you get fines that are just absolutely astronomically ridiculous. Like some guy got €100,000 fine for flying in Rome. Some guy got €33,000 for flying in Milan outside the cathedral. And it's just kind of like, just use your head. It's just like, you can't fly there. There's military zones all around with armed guards. It's undercover police everywhere, and they're literally waiting for someone to launch their drone and they're gonna come grab you. So it's just not very smart to do that. Since I was cycling the entire country, I was gonna be in so much free space where I could fly the drone. So I was just like, this is a no-brainer for me to get some good footage out there. And I got a 250 gram drone, well, 249 gram drone, which lets me fly, you know, in towns that aren't restricted, you know, near houses, over people, not close to people, and then you can't fly over big groups. Try to briefly cover that. In Italy, drone insurance is mandatory. So public liability, I think it's €1 million minimum. So, you know, that's cover in case, you know, you get pursued if you hit like a building, if you hit a car, if you hit a bit of public property. So I had £1 million cover, and that covered me in Europe as well, including Italy. And that cost me £25 for the year. So like I said, that's mandatory. So you don't want to be caught short with anything to do with a drone, to be honest, because it does seem quite scary. So that's insurance costs. Looking at transport costs now, in total, £825. I'll break that down now. So I had to get 4 planes because I had to split the trip in 2. So I had to fly from Manchester to Venice, and then I did that part of the trip, Venice back to Manchester, Manchester back to Venice, and then, you know, back again. And 2 of those are with the bike box and the suitcase. So The first time I went over, I brought everything, did the cycle, left it at my family's house, came back with nothing, went again from Manchester to Venice with nothing, and then I bought that back eventually. So that came to £359 for those 4 flights. Then trains. So once I finished the entire trip, I was in the western region of Piedmont, and I had to get all the way back to Venice to get my flight. So it cost me £43 to get a train all the way from a place called Pinerolo to Susegana, which is where like my family lives. So next off is ferries. So I did Sicily and Sardinia, the islands. So first ferry, Calabria to Messina, which is in Sicily. I cycled Sicily, and then I got the ferry from Palermo to Naples. I cycled from Naples through Rome to a place called Civitavecchia, and I got the ferry from there to Cagliari, which is in Sardinia. I then cycled from Cagliari, South Sardinia, to the north at Porto Torres, and that's where I got the 4th ferry to Genova. So that's 4 ferries in total, and that cost me £157. I got these overnight, so I got 3 of them overnight. The one from Calabria to Messina was only 20 minutes, so no need to sleep on that one. So it meant I could also stay a night there. And then this is a big one that was kind of like a hard one to swallow for me, to be honest. £266 for 2 taxis to get me to Manchester Airport with my bike box and a suitcase. So the box I had was huge. It was about 1.7 meters wide and then 1 meter high, and I couldn't fit it in my parents' car. Too big, so I had to get a taxi to the airport with the suitcase as well. When I got to Italy, my family over there had a big car, they could get it in, it was fine. But that is a problem if you have a cardboard box as opposed to kind of like a slimmed down version of like a travel suitcase. But when you look at those travel suitcases, a good one is going to set you back maybe like £500. And it's like, I got the bike new and it came in this cardboard box, which is very sturdy. And it's probably the most common way that people travel with bikes, to be honest, because not everyone can afford those big suitcases. So yeah, £266, 2 taxis. But then that also subtracts the cost of, petrol if my dad drove me, or if I got the trains from here to Manchester. But yeah, definitely a tough one to swallow. The final category here we got is equipment. So I got equipment split into the base costs of my gear and then also maintenance. So the base cost of the minimal equipment, I'd say, to do this for me was £2,034, and that includes the bike itself, which is a Cannondale Top Zone 3. I got it from a dealer for £1,050. The retail price was £1,400, but this was the previous year's model, so I managed to get some money off of that. And then I'd never been camping before, so I had no camping gear whatsoever, and I bought everything new, and that cost me £464. And then bike bags and mounts, so everything that I need to be able to bike pack with, that cost me £520. So that is the split, I'd say, of the bare minimum equipment that I could have gone with. Stuff like clothes, I didn't have any specialist jerseys, things like that. I had like the cheap stuff from Decathlon that I already had. So you can definitely do that cheaper. There's definitely more budget setups. You can buy a secondhand bike for maybe a couple £100. You can get it done with. Because I had such big aspirations for this bike, to do all of Italy and then all of Scotland, and I didn't really want to trawl secondhand kind of bikes on Facebook Marketplace, all that kind of stuff, and potentially not get one. I just wanted to get the bike, book the plane, and then know I'm going to go. So you could definitely, save money on that. So I got Oatly bags, 2 pannier bags, and then a rack pack, which gave me 71 liters of space on the back, which was huge. And then I bought a tubeless 29-inch classic rack to mount them on. And that all came to £270, I'd say. So you can definitely get that for cheaper. There's definitely some budget bikes out there. You can get some Rock Bros, Top Peak, all that kind of stuff. But I just wanted something that I knew would keep my equipment dry, because a lot of these bags, you look at them and they never say if they're waterproof or not. And it's sometimes hard to tell, because they'll say like water resistant, but then you'll see videos of people with them and their stuff gets wet. I'm like, I'm gonna be out there for 4 months. I don't want my stuff to be wet when it rains every day. And yeah, it was Honestly, not as much as I expected. If you buy new from the Audley website, it's a bit more expensive. But if you look at some of the kind of like outdoor dealers out there, you can get a decent price like I did. But it's expensive, but I think it's worth the money. The good thing about this is, the base cost of all this gear carries forward for whatever trip I do next. So Scotland, all my equipment's fine, it carries forward. So I wouldn't include that in kind of like the cost of this, but if you are starting new like I did, you have to include that because that's just how much it will cost. Then moving on to maintenance. It cost me £388 for kind of like maintenance and mechanics, and then also extras in terms of buying inner tubes, that kept popping, a new kind of water bottle holder, which one of mine broke. And then just kind of, this includes also like energy gels and stuff like that I bought from Decathlon. The three major kind of bike malfunctions that I had, first off, derailleur brake, which I talked about, cost me £90 all in all. Second one was a tire bulging. So I remember that mechanic trip cost me £80 because I bought a new tire, which cost $50, and then the mechanic work, and then I also bought a spare pair of bib shorts, because I forgot mine back home, and they deducted some money off of that, so I got that all for $80. And then the last one was the back gear cable. It snapped. So, my rear derailleur, it's got 9 speeds, it snapped and I couldn't use any of them. It was stuck in the highest gear. And I got that replaced as well as my chain, because my chain was absolutely totaled, and that cost me another £80. And then, with other stuff I bought, that came to $388. So in total, equipment costs $2,422. But like I said, $2,034 of that, it's carried forward, so I haven't lost that money. If I were to sell my stuff secondhand, I probably would lose it, but I'm not selling it, so yeah. So all in all, if you wanted to do this, from nothing, £7,324 to cycle around Italy for 128 days, and then also to have another 20 days in the country. It is expensive. And looking at that number now, it's like, that is so much money. But looking back at kind of like my attitude at money previously, I never really spent that much or close to that amount on anything for myself ever. So after university, I went, moved straight to London and started working. And in total, I worked 6 years. And during that time, I was in a very heavy saver mindset. So I looked up all the best kind of personal finance methods I could follow. I started saving from day one, which at the time was during COVID. So it would have been amazing if I had a lot of kind of spare cash to pump into the market at that time. But all I had was like £100 and then £200 a month. So I didn't really kind of reap the rewards of that boom after. But I've been saving every day since then. A decent chunk of money, so a couple hundred, moving up to I think at most like £600 a month. And I would cycle to work every day. I'd cycle around the city when I wanted to do stuff. So I prepare all my own meals. I'd always, cook my own dinner and then make breakfast and lunch for the day tomorrow at work. It was kind of nice because I used to eat kind of simple meals anyway, so I could kind of get by with that. And it was good for the gym, eating healthy, as well as, joining cheap gyms, Pure Gym. Definitely getting some costs down there. But, in Clapham, where I lived last, £60 for the Clapham gym per month, which is ridiculous for Pure Gym. It's just so expensive there. And then living in flat shares, so, I didn't bust out £1,500 a month to live on my own. I'd always be below 1,000, which, is a lot of money, but it is London. And then also I wouldn't go over the top with nights out and things like that. Near the end, the last couple of years, I didn't really go out too often at all. And when I did, it would be with work, and, I wouldn't really spend that much because, work would pay for it. So yeah, I definitely had that saver mindset, and it was a hard pill for me to swallow to spend this much money on a trip like this. But then I just thought, I can't let the money put me off doing this dream that I have, because it's like, what am I going to do with the money at the end of the day? Either I waste it or I save it. And it's like, I save it for what? I might use it to buy a house one day, but then that would lock me into working a job to be able to support the mortgage. And you can kind of go around in your head all day if you have that kind of mindset of, oh, I just need to save the money. It's like, for what? So it was definitely a tough pill to swallow, like I said, to buy that gear, but it's like it forced me into it. So once I started buying the equipment, I was committed. I was like, I can't back out now because I've already spent this much money on the equipment. So it was a good way to lock myself in. And the only alternative I'd say was, to go out and kind of like go on a find myself travel adventure in terms of, going to Southeast Asia or South America, where your money will go a lot further, but you're doing more things like, sightseeing, living a bit more of a comfortable lifestyle, maybe not in some of those hostels that you go to, but in terms of, lounging about all day, drinking on the beach, going to these parties and stuff like that. And that is a good way to, travel and spend your money and kind of like have experiences like that. But it wasn't for me at that time, getting drunk and, going and partying and stuff like that abroad. It would have been fun, but then I was in that mindset where I was quite restless. I was just like, I've just quit my job. I've got no income. I don't know what I want to do with the rest of my life. I don't know if I'm going to go back to the life I just had. So I'm just like, I want to work on building something. What can I do that would kind of like potentially compound in terms of making content, working on a physical goal. So cycling all of Italy really did so much for me in terms of giving me something to work towards, because it's like, if you kind of endlessly travel out there, it's like, to what end? You just kind of one day get sick of it and then you have to come back, or you run out of money and you come back. So it was just like, cycling Italy just did so much for me, being able to improve my Italian, see my family out there, see Italy, which is a place that I've always wanted to explore more because of my family heritage there. And also that dream of buying that cabin one day. So it really tied it all together, and it really gave me something to work towards, and it was definitely worth the money for me. For someone now who's looking to do something similar, this cost could be very off-putting to you, because it is expensive. And, traveling by bike is supposed to be perceived as cheap, and it really can be. You just need to put in more effort. I was definitely quite lazy with this, and I kind of enjoyed that because it just meant that I could kind of relax every day. I had the money to spend if I couldn't find a campsite, or if it was raining heavily with a big storm, I knew I could just go in a hotel. So yeah, it kind of, that money went towards a feeling of relaxation and easiness on this journey for me, which is very good. So I've already said my next challenge is going to be cycling all of Scotland. I'm half Scottish, and fortunately my aunt and uncle are going to come down and collect me, bring me to a place near Edinburgh, and then I'm just going to cycle north, do the full country. Costs are going to be so much less in Italy, which is going to be great. I can camp more because wild camping is like explicitly legal. No transport, no health insurance, nothing like that. So, and it's going to be, I'm going to say like a month to cycle around. Like I said, 30 to 45 days maybe. So the rest of my savings can see me through that. Once I come back, I'm going to have to get, some job, probably part-time, and just to be able to bring in some money, because I want to work on putting together the photo book and then the documentary video for both trips, one for Italy and then one for Scotland. And I aim to get that done by the end of the year, so end of 2025. And then that is kind of my plans for this year. And then for 2026, I have the next adventure I think I'll probably go on would be visiting Thailand, which is, kind of like that, Southeast Asia trip that I was talking about, but it's a bit different for me. It's going to be a nostalgia trip because I grew up in Thailand. My parents are teachers and we moved out there when I was, just a very young kid. And it was pretty much my childhood home in Bangkok. And it will be cool to see my old school, see some friends I haven't seen, since I was last there. I haven't been back in like 15 years, which is quite crazy to be honest. But then I can also, see some of the beaches in the south, train some Muay Thai gyms. I haven't done any Muay Thai in like 3-4 years. And I'm definitely not doing any now while I'm doing these cycle trips because very injury prone to the legs. So yeah, I'm not decided if I'm going to do a cycle in that trip, or if I maybe leave it for a later day if I ever do a cycle of Thailand, which could be quite interesting with all the soy dogs out there and just kind of, the humidity, the torrential rainstorms. It was funny when I moved back to England, seeing the rain here versus Thailand, it's just like, is this even rain? Can you call this rain? You know, when it comes down heavy for once, it's usually for just like 5 minutes, whereas in Thailand, it would be like a good 2 hours of just like absolute crazy rain. And in Thailand, you know, it didn't snow, but instead we had flood days where Bangkok would just, the water levels would just rise and you couldn't actually drive to the school, so we'd have flood days off. It wasn't very often, and potentially they'd fix that sewer system, but probably not. So yeah, that'll be a good nostalgia trip for me. So I need to save some money for that. So that's the plans for me. If I can, the ideal situation would be if I managed to finish Scotland and I managed to gain some kind of presence to get a brand deal or like a sponsorship to plan a ride in Thailand and then make that official thing. That would really motivate me to do it, and it'll definitely happen in that case. If not, you know, I'll still continue to work on it and just do the Thailand trip as a bit more of like a holiday thing, because I wouldn't have the money to put it all into this. So yeah, interesting times. So, you know, this video is about the costs of, you know, cycling all of Italy, and yeah, we talked about that. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video, which may be a video in Scotland, potentially like, you know, what I eat in a day, kind of stuff like that. I really don't know what the algorithm likes, but I just need to make more videos essentially and put more work into it. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll crawl over to the camera.